I was sitting alone in my study that Thursday evening, a cup of lukewarm tea beside me, flipping through old photos I hadn't touched since my wife passed. My house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that makes you feel every year of your age. I had opened a worn folder of company archives, just trying to lose myself in something familiar, when my phone buzzed on the desk. The caller ID made my stomach tighten. Michael. My longest-serving employee. A man who never called unless something was wrong. I answered, expecting a question about payroll or a client. Instead, his voice came through loud, strained, and shaking in a way I had never heard before. Sir. I need to ask you something, and I'm sorry if this sounds strange, but did you approve the new filings today? I frowned. What filings? There was a pause. A long, terrible pause. Mr. Carter, are you aware your daughter-in-law just submitted documents to legally remove you from your own company? For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It felt like someone had pressed a hand against my chest and squeezed. My ears rang. My vision blurred around the edges. I thought I had misheard him. That maybe the loneliness, the long days, the grief still lingering after my wife's death had finally begun to play tricks on me. But no, Michael repeated it. Slower. Colder. More devastating the second time. My daughter-in-law. The woman who had smiled in my home. The woman who had called me Dad. And she wanted to erase me. Before I tell you what happened next, please subscribe to the channel if you enjoy true family stories like mine. It genuinely helps us share more of them. Before everything fell apart, my life was quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet in that heavy, echoing way a house becomes after the person who filled it with warmth is gone. I'm 66, and after losing my wife 3 years ago, I learned how to live with silence the way some men learn to live with chronic pain. You don't get used to it, you just adapt. Most evenings, I kept myself occupied with the business I built from nothing. Carter & Sons Manufacturing was supposed to be my legacy, the one thing I'd pass on proudly when I grew too old to run it myself. My son, Daniel, was meant to take the lead. Smart kid, always had the mind for operations, even if he didn't have much of a backbone. I blamed myself for that. Maybe I shielded him too much after his mother died. Then he married her. Isabella walked into our lives like a polished gemstone, too perfect, too symmetrical. Beautiful, articulate, charming to a degree that made people lean in just to stay in her orbit. The kind of woman who could smile while dissecting you with her eyes. I noticed it the first time we met, her smile never reached them. Not once. Still, I tried. For Daniel's sake. She was family, whether I liked it or not. But over the last year, little things had shifted. Family dinners grew tense. Daniel stopped calling unless it was about work. My grandkids, once so attached to me they'd run through the door shouting, "Grandpa," suddenly needed rest, or had homework every weekend. And Isabella, she was always there. Hovering. Fielding calls meant for my son. Redirecting conversations. Correcting details I didn't even remember sharing with her. She inserted herself everywhere, in my home, my routines, my business. I tried to chalk it up to generational differences or her organized personality, the excuse Daniel used anytime I raised an eyebrow. But the truth was simpler. She didn't like sharing control. Not over the family. Not over my son. And certainly not over the company that bore my name. Back then, I thought she was just overconfident. I had no idea she was building something. Preparing something. Positioning herself with quiet, calculated precision. And I was too blinded by grief, and love for my son, to see that the storm had already begun forming behind her smile. Looking back, the first real warning sign didn't come in the form of paperwork or bank records. It came in subtle shifts, small, almost invisible moments that only make sense in hindsight. It started with access. I used to speak to my son every day. Sometimes about the business, sometimes just about life. But after Isabella married him, the conversations grew shorter, then fewer, then filtered. Every time I called, she was the one answering his phone. "Oh, Daniel's in the shower. He's tied up right now, I'll tell him you called. He's resting, long day at work." Odd, considering he never liked being managed by anyone. Then she began handling things that were supposed to go through him. A supplier would mention a change she requested. A long-time employee would say, "Your daughter-in-law already approved this last week." The first few times I thought I had forgotten something. But as the pattern repeated, a cold, familiar instinct, the one I'd developed over decades of running a company, began to stir. She also had a habit of appearing exactly when she wasn't needed. If I stopped by their home unannounced, she'd glide into the room within seconds, smiling as if she had been waiting behind the door. Whenever Daniel and I discussed operational decisions, she'd somehow slip into the conversation with perfectly timed suggestions she delivered with such confidence that it made Daniel nod without thinking. Then came the family gatherings. She controlled the guest list, the timing, the conversations. She steered my grandchildren away from me, always with a soft, calculated excuse. The strangest moment happened the day she accidentally addressed me as former chairman during a barbecue. She laughed it off quickly, acting embarrassed. I pretended not to notice. But something inside me tightened. It was the first time I wondered, truly wondered, whether she was preparing for a future she hadn't told me about. And whether that future still had room for me. The real shift became undeniable one Sunday evening, when they invited me to dinner at their house, a house that never felt like a home. Isabella had decorated it herself, and everything about it reflected her, immaculate, curated, controlled. The living room looked like a showroom. Glass surfaces you were afraid to touch. White furniture no child could sit on. Art pieces no one could explain. It wasn't a place built for family. It was a stage. I remember stepping inside and instantly feeling like I had walked into someone else's life. My grandchildren sat on the couch with tablets in hand, their eyes glued to screens. No hugs. No excited shouts. Just a stiff little wave before Isabella gently reminded them, "Don't get too worked up. Grandpa has had a long day." As if she knew my limits better than I did. Daniel came downstairs moments later, still buttoning his shirt, and gave me a quick, distracted smile, the kind you reserve for a neighbor, not your father. He used to rush to greet me. Now he barely looked away from whatever message buzzed on his phone. And Isabella, she floated around the dining room adjusting napkins, smoothing invisible wrinkles, making sure everything appeared flawless. When she finally sat across from me, she leaned forward with that polished smile that made my skin prickle. "Dad," she said lightly, "I've been thinking, maybe it's time you relaxed a little more. Let us handle the bigger decisions at the company." Just like that, slipped casually between comments about the roast chicken. Daniel didn't even look up. He just nodded like it was obvious. Throughout the meal, Isabella kept steering every conversation. If I mentioned a contract, she corrected me. If I brought up an employee, she dismissed it as outdated. When I tried to share a story about their mother, her mother-in-law, Isabella cut in with a bright, tight laugh. "Oh, let's not talk about sad things tonight." It wasn't sadness she feared. It was history. She wanted to control the present, and erase anything she couldn't influence. By dessert, the message was clear. She had positioned herself as the decision-maker. Daniel followed her lead without realizing it. And I was being moved, inch by inch, to the outskirts of my own family. I walked out that night with a heaviness I couldn't shake. Something was shifting beneath the surface. Something deliberate. And I wasn't imagining it anymore. The first undeniable crack in the facade appeared on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I had just finished watering the garden when my accountant, Richard, a man who has handled my books for 25 years, called me. He never calls before noon. Ever. When I answered, I could hear him breathing too fast. "Mr. Carter. I need clarification on something," he said. "A set of documents came through the system last night." "What documents?" I asked, wiping my hands on my jeans. There was a pause. A strained one. "Authority transfer forms. They list your son and daughter-in-law as new executive signatories. Full control. Voting rights. Board approval. Everything." My heart thudded like someone had kicked my chest from the inside. "I never signed anything like that," I said quietly. "I thought so," he whispered. "Because the signature we received, sir, it looks like yours, but it's not yours." My mouth dried instantly. "What do you mean?" "It's too precise. Too rehearsed. I know your signature better than my own. Something is wrong." Something cold unfurled inside me. A slow, crawling dread. "Send everything to me," I said. Minutes later, my email pinged. I opened the PDF. The moment my eyes landed on that forged scrawl, my name, written by a hand that wasn't mine, my stomach turned. The pressure on the downstrokes was wrong. The loops were too clean. It was a perfect imitation crafted by someone who had studied me. Someone close. A tremor ran through me as I read the contents. This wasn't some harmless clerical mistake. These were documents granting near-total decision-making power over the company I built with my own two hands. And Isabella's name. There it was. Not in the margins. Not in oversight. But in the authorization line, written confidently, as if she had every right to be there. Before I could catch my breath, Daniel called. "Dad, hey," he said too casually. "Just wanted to check in." My voice came out colder than I intended. "Did you sign anything recently? Anything regarding the company?" A tiny hesitation. Barely half a second. But it was there. Then he laughed. "Dad, come on. You must be mixing something up." But underneath his laugh, I heard something else, something brittle. Fear. Isabella's voice floated faintly in the background. "Tell him everything is fine. He always overthinks." I felt the blood drain from my face. Overthinks? No. Someone was moving pieces behind my back. Someone counting on me to stay quiet. Blind. Trusting. And now I had proof, cold, undeniable proof, that the enemy wasn't outside the family. She was sitting at my son's side. After seeing that forged signature, something inside me snapped into focus. The fog of confusion lifted, replaced by a cold clarity I hadn't felt since my early days building the company. I wasn't dealing with a misunderstanding. I was dealing with a deliberate operation, one unfolding under my nose while I smiled through family dinners like a fool. So, I began digging. Not loudly. Not angrily. Quietly. Methodically. The way a man who's been betrayed moves when he knows he might only get one chance to uncover the truth. I started with my email archives. Every contract, every memo, every board summary from the past year. It didn't take long before I noticed missing attachments, documents that should have formed a paper trail but now led nowhere. Files deleted, threads truncated, approval lines altered. Then I checked the internal company portal. My login still worked, barely. A few sections I had full access to for decades were suddenly restricted. Others opened but showed altered data. Budgets that didn't match up. Reports with edits I never approved. Vendor lists with new names that had never crossed my desk. It was like waking up in your own house and realizing someone had rearranged every drawer. I pulled out a notebook and began listing discrepancies. Within an hour, I had filled 4 pages. Next, I called an old senior manager, Tom, a man who'd been with me since the factory was just a warehouse with one working fan. I asked him if he had noticed anything strange. His voice dropped immediately. "Sir, she's been sitting in on meetings. Giving instructions. Making decisions. She says it's temporary oversight you approved." My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. Temporary oversight? I never authorized that. Tom exhaled shakily. I knew it didn't feel right. But Daniel keeps backing her up. And the newer staff, well, she scares them. They think she speaks for you. She spoke for me. She spoke over me. And now, she spoke as me. That realization settled in my bones like ice. I dug deeper. Late that night, I found something I never imagined existed. Isabella had her own access credentials to the administrative side of the financial systems. A place even Daniel didn't touch without consulting me. Her login history showed hours spent reviewing payroll, equity divisions, executive contracts, shareholder documents, and internal communications. She wasn't helping. She was studying. Mapping every corner of my empire like a thief memorizing the layout of a mansion before breaking in. Somewhere between the rage and disbelief, another emotion crept in. Fear. Because the more I looked, the more I realized she wasn't just maneuvering. She was preparing. Preparing for something far bigger than forged signatures or access restrictions. And judging by the scope of what she had touched, she wasn't planning to take a piece of the company. She wanted the whole damn thing. And she was terrifyingly close. For days, I moved like a man living 2 lives, the quiet grandfather everyone assumed I was, and the man secretly peeling back the rotten layers of a conspiracy forming inside his own family. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that forged signature, my name, twisted into a weapon. But nothing prepared me for what I found next. It started with a confidential email from a longtime client, a man I've known for 20 years. His message was short, hesitant, almost embarrassed. "Are you sure you want your daughter-in-law's company to handle our contract renewal? Her proposal came from what looks like a new branch of your organization. Just double-checking before we sign anything." I stared at the screen, my chest hollowing out. Her company? New branch? There was no new branch. I clicked the attached proposal. That's when the bottom truly fell out. At the top of the document was a logo designed to mimic my company's branding, almost identical but not quite. A near-perfect counterfeit. And beneath it, the name of a new corporation I had never heard before. Carter Strategic Holdings. My name. Twisted into something unrecognizable. And listed as CEO? Not my son. Not me. Isabella Carter. My pulse hammered. My breathing turned shallow. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a calculated, professionally structured takeover attempt. Heart racing, I searched the state business registry. There it was. Filed 6 months earlier. A mirror company, same industry, same service model, created quietly under my nose. I dug through more records, hands shaking. Within minutes, the full strategy became horrifyingly clear. She had transferred small contracts from my company to hers, quietly enough to avoid detection. She had approached vendors claiming she was overseeing a new corporate restructuring. She had created internal confusion so employees thought she was acting on my behalf. She had siphoned off resource rights and supplier deals using documents I supposedly approved. And the worst part? She listed Daniel as her financial director. My son, my only child, had unknowingly been roped into her operation. Whether he understood her real intentions or not, I didn't know. I still don't. But his signature appeared next to hers on several preliminary agreements. Seeing his name there felt like being stabbed twice, once by her, once by him. As I scrolled through the final contract drafts, a cold pressure built behind my ribs. Isabella wasn't trying to influence my company. She was trying to replace it. Replace me. Everything clicked into place with terrifying clarity. The sudden restrictions on my access. The missing files. The forged documents. Her oversight in meetings. The subtle, constant undermining. The way she corrected my employees as if she were the real authority. She was building a parallel empire using the bones of mine. A quiet, steady takeover, one she believed no one would catch until it was too late. And she was close. Dangerously close. I sat there in the dim glow of my study, papers spread around me like a battlefield, and felt a level of heartbreak I didn't know a man my age could still feel. Betrayal doesn't hit you all at once. It seeps into you. It makes you question every moment, every word, every smile that came before. The realization settled like stone in my chest. Isabella hadn't married into my family to be part of it. She had married into it to control it. And now, she was preparing to erase me completely, from the company, from decision-making, maybe even from Daniel and my grandchildren. But in her arrogance, she miscalculated one thing. She thought I was old enough to ignore the signs. She forgot I was also old enough to recognize a hostile takeover when I saw one. By the time I gathered the contracts, screenshots, and registry filings, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the mouse. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was fear, real, bone-deep fear, not of losing the company, but of losing the last of my family to a woman who treated relationships like business assets. I knew I couldn't fight this alone. I needed someone sharp. Someone who knew the law better than Isabella could manipulate it. There was only one person I trusted for that. Margaret Hayes. Margaret had been my corporate attorney for over 2 decades, a woman whose mind was as sharp as steel and twice as unforgiving. She handled every expansion, every acquisition, every crisis that came in the early days. She knew my company almost as well as I did. When she picked up, her voice was calm and familiar. "Robert? You don't usually call this late." I swallowed hard. "Margaret. I need your eyes on something. It's urgent." She must have heard the strain in my voice. "Email it. I'll look immediately." I sent everything, every stolen contract, every forged signature, every corporate filing tied to that fake company bearing my name. Then I waited, pacing the length of my study like a caged animal. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. Her voice was different this time. Lower. Sharper. "Robert, this isn't just suspicious. This is coordinated fraud." The room felt colder. "I feared that." "You didn't just fear it, you were right." Papers rustled on her end. "Your daughter-in-law has constructed a structure meant to siphon your assets. This is the kind of scheme that gets people indicted." I closed my eyes, letting her words settle. "I didn't want to believe she was capable of something like this," I whispered. Margaret didn't soften. "Belief is irrelevant. The evidence is overwhelming. And if she's forging your signature, accessing restricted financial systems, and creating a mirror corporation, then we're looking at identity fraud, corporate theft, and possibly conspiracy." I felt that word, conspiracy, hit my chest like a hammer. Margaret continued, "All business. We need to lock this down immediately. Don't confront her. Don't confront Daniel. Not yet. I'll need every document you have. Every email. Every password change. Every timeline detail. And you must stay quiet while I begin pulling the legal threads." Her final words were steady and surgical. Robert, someone is trying to take your life's work. And if we move correctly, we're going to take their plan apart piece by piece. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than dread. I felt the beginning of a counterattack. Margaret's words were still echoing in my head long after the call ended, but one question refused to leave me alone. How did she get that close? How did Isabella acquire the access, the authority, the signatures she needed to build her little empire inside mine? And then, like a crack in old concrete, something in my memory shifted. It was a moment I had buried without realizing it. A moment that, at the time, seemed small. Harmless. Ordinary. About 8 months earlier. It was the anniversary of my wife's passing, one of those quiet days where grief feels heavier than usual. I had spent the morning at the cemetery, left flowers, and returned home drained in a way only widowers understand. Around 3 p.m., I heard a knock. When I opened the door, Isabella was standing there with a soft expression and a paper bag from my wife's favorite bakery. "I thought you could use some company today," she said gently. A gesture that felt thoughtful. Unexpected. Human. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one my wife and I shared for years. The sun warmed the room, and for a brief moment, I let my guard down. Grief does that. It softens the edges of your judgment. Isabella asked about how the business was running without my wife's steadying presence. She offered condolences. She listened, really listened, in a way I hadn't experienced from her before. Then she placed a folder on the table. "Since we're talking about the future, Daniel and I met with a financial advisor. They said it might be wise for you to update your emergency documents. Nothing major, just ensuring decisions can be made if anything ever happens to you." She slid it closer. A stack of papers, neatly tabbed, highlighted in places. Power of attorney. Emergency authorization. Corporate continuity addendums. Buried among them was a form listing, temporary delegation of operational oversight. I remember hesitating. I remember telling her I didn't want to add anything that complicated. And I remember the exact moment she tilted her head, softened her voice, and touched my hand. "Dad, we just want to help. We don't ever want to be caught unprepared. Daniel worries about you. Please, just initial the marked spots. It's routine." "Dad." She called me Dad. I had only heard that word from her a handful of times. That day, it broke me a little. The kitchen was quiet. The air was warm. My heart felt unbearably heavy. And the idea of refusing, of causing tension, felt exhausting. So I signed. I signed every tab she pointed to. I didn't read the fine print. I trusted the woman sitting across from me. When she gathered the papers, her eyes glimmered with something I didn't recognize then. Satisfaction. Triumph. A spark of victory I mistook for gratitude. Now, with everything I had uncovered, I realized the truth. That day wasn't compassion. It wasn't concern. It was the opening move of a long con. I handed my enemy the keys to my kingdom, at my own kitchen table. And she walked out of my house wearing the smile of someone who had just struck gold. After the flashback hit me with full force, I sat there at my desk for a long time, staring at nothing, barely breathing. I had handed Isabella the weapon she used to cut me out of my own life. And she had done it with pastries, soft words, and a gentle hand on mine. But grief wasn't going to save her now. Not anymore. When Margaret called back later that night, she spoke with the calm precision of someone assembling a war plan. "Robert, listen closely," she said. "You cannot react emotionally. You cannot confront her. Not yet." "I understand," I said, though I didn't, not fully. "Your daughter-in-law believes you're vulnerable," she continued. "She believes you're too trusting, too distracted, too old to understand what she's doing. That assumption is your advantage. Her voice hardened. You must let her believe it. I leaned back, rubbing my temples. I'd spent my whole life leading, commanding, making decisions. Pretending to be weak felt like swallowing glass. But Margaret wasn't finished. She expects you to fight with outrage. She expects an argument. She expects confrontation. If you give her any of that, she'll clean up her tracks before we can expose her. You need to be predictable to her. Calm. Oblivious. Harmless. I closed my eyes. Harmless. A word no man who built an empire wants attached to him. Daniel and Isabella will invite you to dinner soon, Margaret added. They're confident right now. They think everything is falling perfectly into place. Go. Act grateful. Play the father who trusts them completely. And while I smile, I murmured, you'll be building the trap. She didn't hesitate. Exactly. I exhaled slowly, feeling a shift inside me, a cold, measured determination sliding into place. I'd spent months feeling like a victim in my own family, like a man watching his legacy crumble brick by brick. That feeling disappeared now. I had a role to play. A mask to wear. A part to perform. But before I dove deeper into this twisted game, I needed to speak directly to you. If you enjoy stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe. It helps us share more true family stories just like mine. I returned to the call. What do you need from me, Margaret? Information. Timeline. Copies of every document. And complete silence. Let her think she's still winning. I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. I would sit at their dinner table, smile politely, nod at her suggestions, pretend to be the aging man losing his grip. All while knowing exactly who she was. All while preparing to end her plan from the inside. Because if she thought she was the only one capable of strategy, she had no idea who she was up against. 2 days later, the invitation arrived exactly as Margaret predicted, casual, cheerful, calculated. Dad, why don't you come over for dinner on Friday? Daniel's voice sounded warm, but there was a stiffness beneath it. A rehearsed tone. And behind him, I heard her. Isabella. Correcting him on something. Telling him which wine to buy. Directing the evening before it even began. I accepted with a softness I didn't feel. Of course, son. I'd love to. When Friday came, I drove to their house with a strange calmness inside me. Not peace. Purpose. The moment I stepped through the door, I slipped into character, the harmless old man, grateful for a meal and eager for company. The house was pristine as ever, lit warmly, scented with rosemary and lemon. But beneath the pleasant aroma, I could sense tension. Not mine, hers. The tension of a woman who believed she'd already won and was now simply maintaining the illusion. Dad. You made it, Isabella said, gliding toward me with a smile too perfect. She kissed the air beside my cheek, then guided me to the dining table like I was a fragile guest in her home. Daniel appeared moments later, and immediately launched into a speech about new organizational changes at the company, changes he, apparently, was now taking the lead on. I nodded politely. Pretended to listen. Pretended to be impressed. But every word he spoke was a script Isabella had written for him. Halfway through dinner, she shifted the conversation. So, Dad, she said lightly, to reduce your stress, Daniel and I have been handling some of the heavier responsibilities. You deserve to enjoy your retirement, you know. Retirement. The way she said it made my teeth clench. Daniel chimed in, oblivious, yeah, Dad. You've carried the company for decades. Let us support you now. Support me. They were cutting out the foundation and calling it support. I swallowed my anger and forced a warm smile. Well, if you two think it's best, I trust your judgment. Her eyes flickered, just for a moment. A spark of satisfaction. That quiet pride of someone who believes the trap is already sprung. She kept talking, about growth, leadership, future expansions, all things she had no right to discuss. She was rehearsing her new role out loud, expecting me to nod my approval. And I did. Because I wasn't there to confront her. I wasn't there to argue or fall apart. I was there to watch. To memorize every lie. Every gesture. Every sign of arrogance that would later help bring her down. By the time dessert came, Isabella looked relaxed. Comfortable. Confident. She believed I was exactly what she needed me to be. Blind, trusting, and comfortably stepping aside. And while she reveled in that illusion, I sat across from her quietly. Already planning the moment I would rip her entire scheme apart. The moment I left their house that night, I dropped the mask. The polite smile. The act of confusion. The softened voice. All of it fell away the second my car door shut. I sat there in the dark driveway, gripping the steering wheel hard enough that my knuckles went white. My heart wasn't pounding from fear anymore, it was from restraint. The urge to confront her across that dinner table had been overwhelming. But Margaret was right. If I challenged Isabella too early, she would have covered every track before I could expose her. So instead, I drove home and immediately sent Margaret a message. "Tomorrow. We start." She replied within seconds. "Already preparing." The next morning, our counterattack began. Margaret showed up at my office in a charcoal suit that could cut glass. She didn't waste time with sympathy or small talk. She walked in, placed her briefcase on my desk, opened it, and began pulling out forms like a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. "Robert, listen carefully," she said. "We're launching a multi-front evidence sweep. You'll help gather the personal side. I'll handle the legal and corporate angles." I nodded, ready. She outlined the plan. 1. Financial audit, immediate. Margaret filed emergency audits with my bank, the company's accountants, and our external financial partners. She demanded transaction logs, sign-in histories, authorization trails, and vendor payment analyses. "This is where fraud always leaves footprints," she said. By noon, the preliminary data started coming in. And the footprints weren't small. They were enormous. There were payments made from secondary accounts I never approved. Consultant fees routed to unfamiliar names. Vendor contracts redirected toward entities connected to that mirror company of hers. And then there were the personal charges. Luxury boutiques. Designer bags. High-end spa visits. Hotel bookings, multiple. All masked as executive expenses or corporate hospitality. Hotel bookings. More than one. Under a male companion's name I'd never heard before. I stared at the printout, feeling something inside me fracture, not from betrayal of the business, but from what it implied about my son's marriage. Margaret saw my expression and simply said, "This supports our case. Keep going." 2. Digital forensics, deep dive. Next came the digital side. Margaret brought in a forensic IT specialist, a quiet man with wire-rimmed glasses and a tablet that never seemed to leave his hands. He examined login histories, device IDs, access logs, and email metadata. 2 hours later, he looked up. "Your daughter-in-law accessed areas of the system she had no legal right to enter. Multiple times." "How?" I asked. He tapped the screen. "She used Daniel's login, and yours." He turned the tablet toward us. And there it was. My username. My password. Used from a device I didn't own. In locations I hadn't been. The specialist added, "These entries were done by someone who rehearsed your signature and your writing pattern." They were careful. But not enough. Margaret nodded sharply. That's identity misuse. Document it. 3. HR interviews, quiet and controlled. While this was happening, she sent official but discreet HR inquiries to senior staff. Not accusations, questions disguised as routine compliance checks. The responses revealed more. Several employees confirmed. Isabella sat in meetings she wasn't invited to. She issued directives on behalf of the family leadership. She insisted certain decisions had full patriarch approval. She pressured younger staff with veiled threats. And she hinted, more than once, that I was transitioning to retirement. A manufactured narrative. One she had rehearsed so thoroughly that some people believed it. 4. Vendor testimonies, the smoking guns. Margaret's final move was to contact key vendors personally, asking for clarification on contract changes. One by one, the testimonies rolled in. She told us the company was restructuring. She said you were stepping back for health reasons. She claimed authority over purchasing. She insisted payments would now come through the new branch. It wasn't confusion. It was a coordinated takeover. 5. The double life. Late that evening, as the last files came in, Margaret sent me one final document, one that knocked the air from my lungs. A transaction history from Isabella's personal shell company. There were payments to a private apartment, one I'd never heard of. Flower deliveries. Dinner reservations for 2. Travel bookings. Gifts purchased using company redirected funds. The male companion from the hotel charges appeared again. This wasn't just corporate betrayal. It was personal betrayal weaponized for financial gain. Margaret placed the compiled evidence on my desk, a thick stack already forming. This is enough to tear her entire scheme apart, Robert, she said. Enough to dismantle her leverage, expose her fraud, and legally neutralize everything she built. I looked at the documents. Every page was a thread. Together, they formed a net, one that would close around her before she even realized it was there. Margaret's voice cut through the tension. Tomorrow, we'll move to the next phase. But understand something clearly. She leaned forward. She didn't make a mistake. She didn't act impulsively. She planned this. Calculated it. Executed it. Then she pointed to the stack. And now we're going to dismantle her exactly the same way, calmly, strategically, and completely. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something almost foreign. Control. And a quiet, dangerous resolve. Because now, the real battle was about to begin. The confrontation wasn't a scene in my living room, or at their dinner table, or in some emotional family shouting match. No. Margaret made sure it happened on ground Isabella could not manipulate. The boardroom. My boardroom. The place where I built my legacy. The place she tried to hijack. Margaret scheduled an urgent compliance meeting with the company's legal team, board members, and financial officers. No details. No explanations. Just a time, a place, and mandatory attendance. Professionals don't ignore those. When I walked in, everyone was already seated. A long mahogany table stretched across the room, polished to a mirror shine. At the head sat Margaret, posture razor straight, papers stacked beside her like weapons ready for use. Isabella arrived a few minutes later. Glowing with confidence, dressed in a crisp white suit like she owned the place. Daniel followed behind her, looking tired, confused, and far too trusting of the woman who'd set him up like a chess piece. She smiled at me politely. "Dad, what's going on?" As if she didn't already believe she knew. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Margaret stood. "Thank you all for coming. We're here to address a series of critical irregularities involving corporate authority, forged approvals, unauthorized financial transfers, and fraudulent business activity." The room went still. Isabella blinked once, too slowly. Margaret continued, voice smooth and deadly. I will be presenting evidence now. She placed a thick binder in the center of the table with a heavy thud. The sound echoed through the room like a gunshot. This is a compiled report detailing identity misuse, unauthorized system access, shell corporations mimicking our brand, fraudulent contracting, misappropriation of funds, and deliberate attempts to undermine the company's rightful leadership. Daniel's head snapped toward Isabella. What is she talking about? Isabella's smile didn't break, but the corner of her lip twitched, a tiny crack in the perfect mask. Margaret flipped the first page. Here is the state filing for Carter Strategic Holdings, signed by your wife as CEO. Filed without board approval. Without Robert Carter's knowledge. And illegally using assets from this company to operate. She flipped another page. Here are the forged operational permissions with your father-in-law's signature, confirmed fraudulent by 2 independent handwriting analysts. Another page. Here are emails she sent vendors claiming to represent Mr. Carter's decisions, redirecting contracts into her own company. Another. Here are internal login records from Robert Carter's account, accessed from a device he does not own. Another. And here. She paused. Her eyes locked onto Isabella. Our personal transactions, hotel stays, gifts, apartment payments, funded by redirected corporate money, involving a man who is not your husband. Gasps rippled across the room. Daniel went pale. Isabella, what is she talking about? Who is this? Isabella finally broke. This is ridiculous, she snapped. You can't accuse me of. Margaret cut her off with a single raised hand. Everything presented here is verifiable. Documented. And already notarized for submission. She turned to the board members. We move today to strip Isabella Carter of any assumed authority, to formally disassociate her shell corporation, and to reverse all unauthorized transactions. Legal action is already prepared. Then she looked at me. Robert, the floor is yours. It had been months since anyone deferred to me in my own company. I didn't give a speech. I didn't raise my voice. I simply said, proceed. The board voted unanimously. Her entire scheme collapsed in minutes. And Isabella, who once moved through my life with the confidence of a queen, suddenly looked small. Cornered. Exposed. Daniel stared at her as if seeing a stranger. He whispered, you used me. You used my family. You used him. For the first time since this nightmare began. I watched Isabella panic. Margaret closed the binder. This concludes the meeting. The room emptied quickly, leaving Isabella standing alone, her empire gone, her lies laid bare. And that was how her downfall began. Not with shouting. Not with chaos. But with documents, truth, and consequences she never saw coming. After the boardroom collapse, everything moved quickly, quicker than I ever expected. Legal notices were sent. Access was revoked. Her forged permissions were deleted from the system. By the end of the week, Isabella no longer had a single doorway into my company, my estate, or my accounts. But the personal fallout, that was something no document could tidy up. Daniel showed up at my house 3 days after the confrontation. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in a weekend. Dark circles under his eyes, jaw clenched, voice cracked around the edges. Dad. I didn't know, he whispered. I swear to you, I didn't know. I studied his face, the boy I raised, the man who had been swallowed whole by a woman who treated loyalty like currency she could counterfeit. He wasn't lying. He was broken. Deceived. Humiliated. I put a hand on his shoulder. I know you didn't. But now you see her for who she is. He nodded, tears pooling. She tried to turn me against you, against everyone. I feel like a fool. You were manipulated, I said gently. You trusted the wrong person. That doesn't make you weak. Silence settled between us, a painful, heavy silence that carried every moment she had stolen from our family. Daniel eventually moved out of their home. The marriage unraveled within days. And Isabella, once the center of every conversation, every decision, every carefully crafted illusion, vanished into the mess she created, dragging her double life with her. I wasn't proud of what happened. But I wasn't ashamed either. Sometimes protecting your family means removing the very person who swore they were part of it. And sometimes the hardest victory is the one that forces you to acknowledge how close you came to losing everything. In the weeks after everything unraveled, my house felt different. Not lighter, just honest for the first time in a long while. The silence was still there, but it no longer pressed on my chest the way it did before. It wasn't the silence of confusion or suspicion. It was the quiet that follows a storm, messy, raw, but real. I spent a lot of time thinking about how something like this could happen inside a family that once felt unbreakable. And the truth isn't pretty. Trust is easy to give when you love someone, and even easier to weaponize when someone knows exactly how to exploit it. Isabella didn't just betray my company. She betrayed the foundation of what family is supposed to mean. She took our love, our grief, our desire for unity, and twisted every one of those things into an opportunity for control. That's a kind of betrayal that cuts deeper than any corporate blow ever could. But I also learned something else, something I didn't expect. Strength doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it hides behind age, behind loss, behind the parts of you that feel bruised and worn out. But strength doesn't disappear. It waits. And when the moment comes, it shows itself, not with fury, but with clarity. I didn't win because I fought louder. I won because I refused to let her rewrite the truth. In the end, I rebuilt what she tried to dismantle. I took back my company. I reclaimed my role in my family. And my son, he's healing. Slowly, but honestly. We're rebuilding the trust she tried to poison. This whole experience taught me something simple but unforgettable. You can lose your way for a moment. You can be deceived, manipulated, even blindsided. But you are never too old, too tired, or too broken to reclaim what is yours. And if you've made it this far into my story, thank you. Truly. If you enjoy real stories about family, betrayal, and redemption, don't forget to subscribe. It means more than you know, and it helps us share more stories like this one.